Hello, welcome to Future Left Podcast. This is episode 1, the debut episode. I'm Adam Simpson. I'm here with my co-host Casey Rogers. Say hi, Casey.
Hello, everybody.
Great. We're joined today. Outstanding job saying hi, by the way. We're joined today by another Future Left founder, Michael Bufano, live from Cairo, Egypt. How are you today, Mike?
I'm doing fine, Adam. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay, I guess. I'm doing okay. I'm thrilled to be debuting Future Left today, though. That's great stuff. Future Left is an online policy think tank committed toward covering issues, you guessed it, pertaining to our future. We're going to be explaining what that means in this very debut podcast, and we hope you like it. If you do like it or want to know more about it, go to futureleft.org. While you're there, you should definitely subscribe to the Bleeding Edge newsletter. It'll keep you up to date on all our written content, the latest news, and, of course, more podcasts. Also, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter. Twitter handle is @future_left. We're also on SoundCloud, YouTube, LinkedIn, all that nonsense that some people are into, I guess. We want to introduce ourselves, and I'll go ahead and start. I'm Adam Simpson. I currently work as a program assistant at the Atlantic Council's Middle East Strategy Task Force. That sounds fancy, and it is fancy. I'm not gonna, we're all happy about that. I'm originally from Texas. That's how I know Casey. We grew up together. We're in a strictly platonic relationship, I assure everyone. Also, my background, predominantly in Middle East affairs. I've done a lot of work on Israel and Palestine. Lately, a lot of work on Yemen. Before that, I lived in Cairo. That's how I knew Mike. Mike was my good roommate there. Living in Cairo and in Texas, you can say I'm used to more conservative cultures. It's okay though. And I've been much more interested in tech lately, and more on that later. Casey, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, I'm currently teaching history and social studies in Dallas. As Adam mentioned, we're from the same area here in Texas. Went to high school together. My undergraduate work was in religious studies, and I did a minor in Asian studies, specializing in South Asia. And my interests are religion, South Asia, linguistics, mythology, and I'm also a huge sci-fi and fantasy geek. So, ladies, sorry I'm married.
Thanks for telling us that. Thanks so much. Also, now we're going to move to Mike, Mike Bufano. Tell us a little about yourself, Mike. Introduce yourself.
Well, Adam, I initially grew up on Long Island. I went to high school there, and after graduating, I went to South Carolina, where I majored in education and history. After that, I got a master's degree, and when I completed that in 2008, I eventually moved to Egypt, where after studying Arabic for about a year, I got a job at a high school where I now run a social studies department, and I've been there now for about 6 years. And I'm also completing a second master's degree in political science. In particular, I'm interested in the politics and the history of the Middle East. And I really love this project that we're doing right now with the Future Left.
In case you couldn't tell, Mike is the brains of the operation. And we also, one of our founders, the three of us here are all founders. The only founder not here today, Miss Justine Kanzadian, and I'm certainly not going to mansplain a lady's biography. I'll let her do that on a future podcast. We can't wait to introduce her to
Let Justine mansplain it.
Yeah, we'll let Justine mansplain it, exactly. All right, so of course we are going to be introducing our this thing of ours today. And to that end, we're just going to tell you a little bit about it. So basically, this is something I've imposed upon my friends here, that they be a part of this, and I'm glad they're doing it. Basically, the thing we're most interested in, there are a lot of problems we see, whether it's disruptive technology, climate change, continued economic disruption, conflict and development across the world. All these things, we don't really see them being solved in a way that's sustainable. Often these are short-sighted solutions to these problems. In my mind, the elevator pitch I keep giving to people is, political leaders tend to focus on the next election cycle. Business leaders tend to focus on quarterly reports, annual reports. Most people focus on rent and making ends meet. So to that end, we're trying to make Future Left a place where we focus on long-term thinking and doing so in a strategic fashion rather than kind of ad hoc problem solving. All of us are pretty politically engaged in one way or another, progressive young people, and we just really want to widen the discourse toward long-term problem solving. A lot of what we're going to talk about today, we see problems as kind of looming, and it sounds very dreary, but we also want to articulate solutions to these problems. I think is going to be one of the main things that we're about here, and just articulate a vision. That's one of the things we really want to do. Casey, anything you wanna add to that?
Nope.
Thanks for that. All right, so why is it, do you think, Mike, Casey, that politicians, business leaders, we don't really put into the appropriate context long-term planning and more foresight in the policy discussions?
Well, I think when it comes to the electorate, it's tough to be able to sell a politician by talking about long-term issues. Most people, they don't want to hear about the long term. They usually want short-term solutions, things that they want to see right in front of them right away, immediately. And I think it's also an issue of, issues are really complicated. It's tough talking about a lot of these issues and trying to make them digestible for most people.
And
people like their sound bites. They like the news presented to them in a way that is easily for them to understand. But the reality is that the world is a complex place.
Well, I think for a lot of people also, it's very time-consuming and relatively labor-intensive to educate yourself on the issues. And like Adam mentioned earlier, most people are fairly pragmatic, let's say, in air quotes, and interested mostly in their material needs and things like that, and don't really either they don't think about these complex issues because they're a little weighty in a life that's already stressful enough. Or I think a lot of people just don't realize that this stuff is there available for you to break down and digest. I think a lot of people think it's too big and intimidating.
So do you think that we could, like, are we, this is awkward in the first episode, are we tilting at windmills here, or is this the kind of thing that, like, you think people are interested in, long-term planning in terms of policy, or do you think that's something that is kind of beyond the interest of most people?
I think there is a way to frame it. I mean, I recently saw the movie The Big Short. They did a really great job in that film displaying really complex issues involving, derivatives, subprime mortgages, the reasons for the crash of the housing market. They did it in a way that was funny, and I think in a way that people could understand at least the basics of what caused the crash. So I think if you use the right terminology and if you could put it in an entertaining package, people can actually understand at least about what's going on in their world. So I don't think it's impossible to communicate complex ideas. I just think that it's a lot easier for news organizations to talk about he who shall not be named and, his haircut and his, his crazy personality than
his lack of a nose.
His tiny little hands.
His orange.
So is that what Future Left needs? More knock-knock jokes?
I think when most people are in school, they're in school mode, and therefore it's a little, they don't exactly have the energy. They're being forced to be there, and they've got to take in this information. But if you make it entertaining, people tend to listen more actively, and it's almost like you're Trojan horsing the information in with the entertainment. Now, you can be more entertainment or more informative, and I think we're going for the more informative side with dashes of irreverence.
Dashes of knock-knock jokes.
It's, a lot of knock-knock
Who's
jokes.
there? Climate change. Get on the bus.
The electric bus.
Yeah, the self-driving electric bus. That's right.
Not the carbon emitting fossil fuel powered bus.
Yeah, no, not at all.
That's bad.
Now I think we're going to turn to talking about the programmatic work, and we've divided into sections: disruptive technology, sustainability and environmentalism, labor, trade and economy, global conflict and development, and finally American community. So I'll go ahead and start with the first section. It's called disruptive technology, and in my view, this is one of the things that I don't see hardly any planning about. We have the automation of labor. We have self-driving cars. Those have the potential to be pretty disruptive all across the board. And I really do want to see disruptive technology kind of influence all of our other work, because that, in my mind, is one of the biggest trends that we absolutely have to stay aware of. But between advances in, as I said, automation of labor, what that might do to labor markets, you have artificial intelligence, you have the gig and sharing economy still being done by people, but nonetheless it is displacing labor. It's not always bad, but it does have major implications. There's also open access issues, which me and Casey have argued about previously. We'll probably have a whole episode on that soon. But for instance, companies like Tesla, this is the legal mode of it, releasing their patents publicly so that others can build on their work. Then you have a place like Sci-Hub, which is I believe out of Eastern Europe somewhere, based out of Eastern Europe, that basically gets onto academic journals, takes the information, and then releases it publicly, which is piracy, right? But it does enable people to access information who otherwise wouldn't be able to do it, like universities and learning institutions and business leaders in the global South or the developing world, however you want to frame it. And then there's also other issues that I should be more aware of, like cybersecurity. I'll be honest, it's kind of like the piracy fight, and it's going to be a consistent battle between the hackers and cybersecurity. One is always going to be trying to get the edge on the other, but nonetheless, there are significant national security issues in terms of cybersecurity, as well as personal privacy issues. And just to kick off a little bit of a debate about this section, a lot of these disruptions could be harmful in the short term, perhaps even in the long term. But in terms of a philosophy of how we approach technology, do you see technology as something we can really slow down with, even if we did want an effort, or should we rather just prepare ourselves to embrace these trends? And I'm thinking specifically about like something like the piracy versus open access fight, or the automation of labor, and how that could kill jobs. It could kill jobs because our economy is set up in the mandating people to work. So that's my question to the two of you.
Okay, so from my perspective, we are going to have to slow down the pace of technological development. It obviously causes political and economic problems. Just to give you an example, recently in Egypt they introduced Uber, and immediately a lot of the upper class began using their cars to drive people around the city. And of course they have their cell phones, they're able to pick people up and make a few extra bucks off of it. But it began to kill the business of taxi drivers. Now, from the perspective of the rich, they were getting a cheaper ride to work. They didn't have to deal with some of these lower-class cab drivers that don't really take good care of their cars, and they're coming from a different culture, a different part of Cairo. But from the part of the lower class, they were losing jobs. So they began to protest, and now the government has cracked down on Uber, and they're putting an extra tax on it, which is making it more expensive. And I think you're going to see a lot of fights like this in the future. We're already seeing this problem with Uber in many cities across Europe, the United States. So there's going to have to be a compromise between the pace of technological development and people's socioeconomic stability.
I guess my perspective, I don't know how we would slow it down, because this is mostly a private sector issue. Beyond simply blocking something like Uber and sharing economies entering into certain markets, I don't know that that's the way to go. I don't know if that's possible, and I don't know if that's actually ideal.
Technological development seems like just the reality of history. Like that just seems like a that just seems like a reality that's going to happen. And I would worry that in trying to I understand perhaps on an individual basis looking at individual industries, or even looking at individual services like Uber that are having
disruptive effects
that we didn't know this was going to happen, and then now we don't know what to do about it. You can't just say, well, that's life, that's economic development. Like I do think that the government should be equipped and maybe prepared is a better word for it.
I mean, I guess the one problem I have with that, and Mike, I think you'll probably agree with this. In Egypt, when the government gets involved, it's not in a temporary fashion. Mike, I'm sure you're well aware. Like, there's a temporary emergency law that all across the Middle East, really, temporary emergency laws last for decades. That's just one example. Maybe it's an extreme example for an issue like regulating the taxi sector of the market. I don't know. I just don't. This is a really corrupt regime. I don't know that I would trust them to intervene in such a way. It is kind of a unique thing because
how's the economy structured in Egypt?
The way it's structured, it's based on patron-client networks. So although technically the regime since the 1970s has been on this path towards economic liberalization,
right.
This is more propaganda. The reality is they've been privatizing state-owned industries, but normally what they do is they sell it off to a crony who's connected with the regime. So they create these patron-client networks.
So it's a quote-unquote traditional model in traditional parts of the world, the way the economies work.
Oh, exactly. And, there's a lack of real business competition. You need to capture the
Right.
state. You have to get access to the state to be able to own a big business. And, of course, the state itself is also heavily dependent on oil rents, remittances coming from the Gulf, Suez Canal rents. So essentially it's an economy that's severely underdeveloped. Its industry is heavily dependent on oil rents.
What sort of interaction or what sort of mechanisms are in place for the Egyptian government to deal with precision regarding a thing like Uber on that small of a level?
I don't
Would
trust
it be
the
Well, the state is
Would it
incredibly
be precise?
for all its oppression. The state is incredibly weak. I mean, they could throw protesters in jail. They could crack down on dissent. But they can't, they have problems with daily services, garbage pickup, regulating traffic. They're going to have a lot of problems regulating Uber because, in fact, what a lot of Uber drivers are doing now, like if you could get an Uber taxi right now in Egypt, what they'll just tell you is if we get stopped at a checkpoint, just pretend like I'm your friend. The state itself has a lot of problems regulating the economy in general. About 40% of the Egyptian economy is black market. And about approximately 2/3 of the people in Cairo live in informal housing. That's housing that was not initially approved by the government. So there's a lot of black market activity, and it's tough for them to control it.
And another issue
So it sounds
with regard to technology, Egypt, and other regimes that are like Egypt in the Middle East and around the world, really, are, as an issue of free speech, they're throwing people in jail for expressing themselves on Facebook and Twitter. So, in my mind, the way that they try to regulate social media is not unlike how they would try to regulate apps like Uber and markets like that, especially when money's on the line and there are vested interests. Maybe not so much. I don't know that the Egyptian military has consolidated a huge share of the market in taxis. I could be wrong. I don't think that's the case. But go ahead.
So Uber could actually be the Uber service could actually be seen as a form by the government as a form of economic dissent almost.
The elites are split because on the one hand, a lot of the elites like the fact that their kids, get to use this service. They don't have to depend on the white taxi cab drivers anymore. It's a prestige thing, and it's better for them to be able to use it. It's a better service.
Just for the last few minutes of this conversation, I just want to steer it back to more generally, to more developed economies, because I think that's what a lot of issues in disruptive technology.
Yeah, that was what my point was originally. Because I was wondering about the United States. Comparatively, the United States, I'm sure we would all agree, is better in control.
There's rule of law.
So if you look at the Veterans Affairs, for example, they're still using old school filing cabinets. They're still doing everything on paper. They're not.
Wouldn't it be
they're
better
not
if they
using
digitized
the most
it,
up-to-date computer technology. And why? Because you end up having to fire half of the bureaucrats, right? If you end up switching to modern technology. In fact, there's still a lot of bureaucracy.
So you're saying there's an active resistance to going digital because of that,
at least within the government, not within the private sector. Obviously, within the private sector, most companies have already adapted to the new technology.
Sure.
But in terms of the government, in order to continue providing jobs, it doesn't look good for a politician if he has to fire half of his bureaucracy, right? You don't need paper pushers as much as you used to. So if you introduce a lot of this computer technology, if you introduce iPads, for example, in the workplace, all of a sudden you don't need as many people.
But in terms of an issue like automation, like if the economy starts losing jobs to automation, is the proper response for the government to say, no, you have to hire people? You have to take the hit in your economic bottom line. You have to take that hit and hire a person rather than a robot.
Because isn't that a lack of ability on the government's part to cope with the changing landscape? Rather than having to resist progress, rather than having to resist new technologies, should they be in a position to say, well, we can't afford to lose that many jobs? Are there steps they could have taken? Are there ways they could have prepared to cope with automation?
Well, the way the government has handled it in the last 30 years, especially since the early mid-1980s, is through increasing service sector jobs by investing in education, giving out public student loans. It's a part of this trend over the last couple of decades where the government realizes that jobs in manufacturing are going to decrease, that we have to increase service sector jobs. So the way you do that is you educate people, you get them into the sciences, engineering, and you create an educated class of service sector workers. So I think that's where the government is, how the government has responded to this problem of automation and how it's killing a lot of jobs in manufacturing.
In my mind, because even the service sector, those kinds of jobs might be the first to be automated. So there's already like restaurants that don't employ servers anymore because you can just walk in, you can order on the iPad. You have like one guy in the front of house that makes sure everyone can do it. But you can basically eliminate servers if you want.
I'm not talking about like the restaurant jobs and like the tourist jobs. I'm talking about in terms of financing, banking, engineering, science, education, teachers. That this is the type of service, lawyers. This is the type of service sector I'm talking about.
Even in terms of a job like lawyers,
you mean the professional sector, the professional
exactly.
Sector. But even beyond that, and for like lawyers, paralegals basically just do legal research. And I'm kind of talking out of my head here because I don't know much about law. But as I understand it, there's advances in artificial intelligence. You could have a computer program that finds the relevant cases you're looking for, and that could eliminate jobs. So there are a lot of jobs that just aren't safe. But I don't know that the government has the authority in the United States, let's be clear, to intervene in the market in such a way to prevent that kind of job loss. I don't know that they have that authority, and I don't know that, frankly, the public wants to give them that authority. Go ahead, Mike.
In 2008, Barack Obama bailed out, General Motors, and in order to prevent the crash of the company itself, and the bailout of the banks back in 2008. So there have been precedents for the government stepping in to make sure that companies that are too big to fail don't crash and burn. So there is a little bit of a precedent for that. But I don't know of any cases where the government has actually stepped in and said, you have to hire more workers. Or, you can't.
That's essential. We can get to this when we get to your section about trade, but that's essentially the argument when they're saying, why are we shipping jobs overseas? Outsourcing will have a similar effect on our economy as the automation of labor. So,
yeah, exactly.
And if we're mandating that people bring jobs back home and rearrange our trade policies to make people build factories here, which I don't even know that Americans by and large want to work in, especially going forward, I just don't see that we have the kind of strings to pull in terms of automation, because trade policies we can craft. I don't know that we will actually step in and say and regulate, the automation of labor. I just don't. I don't know how to wrap my head around it, and I think we should move on to sustainability in a minute. But I want to let you guys jump in on that idea.
Well, I think what we're dealing with here, and the ultimate solution is going to be with education. Because if you start automating things like the job of a paralegal, which people go to school for and specialize in, then those people are going to have a skill set that is no longer suited for the world if that becomes automated. So something that's going to have to go hand in hand with automation is a revamp of our educational system and the ends towards which we're educating not just kids in primary and secondary schools, but in university education as well. If we're going to gear education towards careers and the workforce, then we're going to have to do it in a way that's compatible with large swaths of professions becoming obsolete in the face of automation. Is that practical? How does that work? At what sort of pace will that happen? It seems to me that it would sort of have to happen simultaneously, and that sort of thing would be very hard to coordinate. Technology grows exponentially with every generation. 2,000 years ago, there was so little advancement from generation to generation, and then when the Industrial Revolution, things really picked up with the automobile, and then it
was the steam engine actually was the beginning of that exponential change.
Yeah. Right. So now it almost seems that technological advancement is happening at a pace that is outside of the human capacity for adaptation. Because when the automobile came along and they went around selling it door to door to farmers would actually try to say "whoa" to the car to get it to stop, and it would, which is adorable. and the cars would wreck, and like that's almost incomprehensible to us today. But that means that farmers in the early part of the century already had the voice automated car concept down. But but that was something that we could take on, incorporate, adapt to, and then it became one of those multiplier inventions that spawned hundreds, if not thousands, of new niche industries and made things possible, made the nationwide shipment a thing. And
Interconnectivity.
Interconnectivity.
Synergy.
But now, but I love synergy. But now it seems like there's so many advances happening simultaneously, all overlapping. I don't know if we're all aware of them. We're certainly subject to them. So are we growing technologically at a rate faster than we're able to adapt to? And is that alienating us from society? I think quite possibly.
I know as a teacher it's incredibly frustrating. Every year there's a new app, a new website I have to learn.
Absolutely.
A new way I have to teach, a new thing I have to adapt in my classroom. And
Yeah.
at a certain point it can get a bit exhausting. And of course the kids have new iPads, new laptops. They have this new technology coming in. And I have to constantly relearn and reteach what I taught from the previous year.
I think
Whereas
that's
teachers
that's
in the past,
skill of
they
the
used to be able to
21st
design a
century.
lot of their lesson plans and carry it over, in future years. And I could imagine with every single profession, even if you keep your job, you're going to have to constantly relearn what you do. And so the best advice you could possibly give to someone who's young today is you have to stay flexible. And
Exactly.
never be
Right,
afraid of
I-
any new
yeah.
type of knowledge, because you never know what you're going to need in the future.
And so maybe education would become less specialized in terms of a particular field. I mean, there would still be that, but things that help with certain skills, like being able to adapt, being able to learn new technologies. I'm sure there's fields of research that are completely untapped on how humans respond and incorporate technology that we're really going to need to start looking at in terms of main, elementary, middle school, high school education.
Yeah, and just to close the note here, I think education is a great solution to this, and I'm going to drop a kind of a nerd bomb here. There's a futurist from the 70s named Alvin Toffler. The skill of the 21st century is going to be able to learn, unlearn, and relearn. That's the end all be all, and I completely agree with that.
Did he explain what that means?
I think Mike just explained what that means.
Sure, absolutely.
Forget about Alvin Toffler. No, I think Mike. I think Mike sums it up pretty well. But on that note, I think we are going to move on to sustainability and environment. Now, this section is normally covered by Justine, so like a typical white male, I'm just going to step in and explain it for her, which is awkward. We're gonna bring Justine in very, very soon to talk about other issues and this one. But bear with me today as I do my best to summarize her section as she describes it. So, in our mind, climate change is one of the single biggest threats to the future. Converting our energy to cleaner forms like solar and wind, transforming our relationship with the environment. These are the critical steps that we have to deal with. The big thing for me, and most of this is UN data, but I'm not going to put footnotes for it, because that's how I roll. And by 2050, we're going to have a population near 10 billion people, and that's an interesting
Holy
year
shit.
because by then we're going to need to feed. We're going to need to increase double food output, but at the same time we're going to have half as much arable land. Half as much arable land, you got to feed twice as many people, and the dealing with that crisis is huge. But in my mind, that goes back to our relationship to the environment, using things sustainably, using things efficiently, and so. What we'll be covering in this section has to do with the climate change quote unquote tipping point. If we reach a certain level of warming, it's just going to be a knock-on effect after knock-on effect. So we're going to lose sea ice, which means the ocean won't be able to reflect light as better, which means it'll heat up, which will melt more sea ice, which will kill all the polar bears. You guys, I don't think people.
I love those things.
Yeah, exactly. The Coca-Cola commercial. Come on now.
Hell
and then
yeah.
Polar bears are godless killing machines.
Michael.
How dare you, sir?
This is not the time for dissent.
We don't need your streetwise New York dealings.
Yeah.
Apologies.
Great stuff, Casey.
Thank you.
Renewable.
Thank
We're
you,
also
Casey.
thinking about renewable energy development, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, whether it's nuclear. Ooh, controversy.
Nuclear.
All right. And we're also going to be talking about sustainable living and making cities that are sustainable rather than kind of sprawling beasts that are inefficient and kind of mired in, the way we've designed them for previous generations. I mean, moving our cities forward, I think, is a big question for this section. But toward that, I want to pose the kind of discussion topic for this. Is there a new prosperity that we should have in mind? And what I mean by that is typically we think of, the best thing about whether it's capitalism, the American dream, is that you can go out and you can attain whatever you want, and that includes you can eat beef every day even though cows fart and murder the earth. Basically, it's a cause and effect relationship.
It's science.
Yeah, exactly.
They murder the earth.
They murder the earth. So
murder's a legal term too.
But is it realistic to ask people to design their lives around sustainability, whether we're talking about lowering their carbon footprint, less energy and water consumption, buying organic products? Is that a realistic thing to ask people to do? And should we, again, this is a government question, should we get the government to get involved in that process? Go ahead, Mike.
I think Mike wants to say something.
It's very realistic. One of the things that we have to change is the suburban model, and we have to go back to living in cities, in tightly knit, compact neighborhoods. This idea of living in a suburban neighborhood with your own large home, big driveway, this goes back to essentially the late 1950s. When Eisenhower first built a lot of the highway systems, and they began to build towns like Levittown in eastern Long Island.
Levittown,
and,
yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so I mean, this idea is only very recent.
That was the first block style. That was the first block style suburban development, right? Levittown.
Yep, that was the first one in existence. And
every time you see a neighborhood with a bunch of shitty, same-looking homes, you can think Levittown.
Exactly.
Tell us how you really feel.
They have them in Egypt now. They're popping up all over the desert.
I saw that when I was in Cairo. I was like, boy, that looks out of place.
Yeah.
It is. It's
as a leftist, I think everyone should live in little boxcars. You know what I mean?
Of course, and we're gray unitards.
And we're gray unitards, exactly. But I don't know. It's a difficult thing in my mind because you're not going to go to your roommate and be like, you really shouldn't take a shower every day. You're wasting water. Or you're not gonna go to your parents and your loved ones and be like, why are you buying this friggin' car? Some people do that, and it's kind of like if someone comes up to me and says, Adam, Jesus Christ, you got to lose some weight. I'm like, you know what? You let me handle it.
You're right, but fuck you.
Yeah, exactly. It's a difficult thing to ask people to kind of confront themselves and confront their social networks.
You have to do it with.
We have this, but there's a sobering reality we have to deal with. There is anywhere between 25 years to 100 years of fossil fuels left, approximately. Obviously, we can't know the exact amount. We don't know population growth, consumption. New technology is going to come about. We might be able to pull more out of the ground. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's not a sustainable resource. I mean, and whether or not people like it, they're going to have to adapt.
If you look at the major producers of oil, or the noteworthy ones that everyone knows, like the United States, like Saudi Arabia, the United States is going toward natural gas. There's this debate about shale, and then Saudi Arabia, they're doing off-sea drilling. If Saudi Arabia was confident in their own oil reserves, they wouldn't be doing it off sea. That's a lot more of an intensive process. It's less efficient. I really don't buy that we have 100 years left of fossil fuels.
It seems like the giant emaciated polar bear in the room that we're not talking about is industry. Is industry and the amount of money in industry, and because that's really the big block in reforming these things. The real big obstacle in the way of sustainable energy sources are the traditional energy industries like oil and the amount of sway that they have politically. You can try to convince people all you want to, but you'll never have as many resources to campaign as politicians, as these large companies often, which are one and the same oftentimes. Sure. So I mean, what do we do about that? We can talk all day about how things should be and about going out and telling people things, but we're not those people. The average everyday people aren't the ones who are going to be making these decisions. Sadly,
No, usually it's during moments of conflict that we will finally adapt, okay, to a certain situation. So if it's a long-term developmental goal, we're less likely to act collectively. But if there's a war, if the price of oil rises so high that you start to see conflict over natural resources, we will begin to adapt. Now, I hope that it doesn't come to that. I hope that we're able to have the foresight to invest in green energy and alternative energies. But usually with human beings, it takes some type of great calamity for us to make
you're right. You're right. You're right. I don't see us making that choice. I see that choice being forced upon us. And in fact, I see most of the major changes. I don't know. I worry about that because I think most of the changes that we're talking about are the sort of thing where, like, for example, he who shall not be named. A lot of people say, what are you going to do if he becomes president? And I almost feel like if we allow that to happen, then we sort of deserve him as a president. And I almost feel like sometimes people are so blind and so unwilling to look ahead. Sometimes they have to be shaken. They have to be slapped around a little bit by seeing the consequences. Che Guevara. No.
Don't do that.
I don't know what I don't know what that was. Yeah. He was a hero. But sometimes I think that a organic revolution, and I don't mean quinoa. I mean a revolution that comes out of the.
It took me a minute to realize you meant quinoa.
Yeah, the settings, just the realities that we've set up for ourselves, not people actually revolting, but at the actual situation itself, trying to throw us to the wolves. And I think we can adapt.
No, if there was a collapse in the availability of fossil fuels right now, then everything would collapse. Everything would stop running. It would turn into Mad Max, and I don't think we would get any kind of policy change. That would be irrelevant. We'd be set back centuries, really.
I agree. But how do we? So the goal then is to. Either way, the goal is to change.
Well, I guess maybe the argument, and this was kind of made on Funny or Die recently. I don't know if you guys saw this. They basically had some famous old actors talking about they don't care about climate change because they're going to die. And maybe that's the argument we should be trying to make, is that old people are going to die. No, I'm kidding. But young people and our children.
You don't hear enough people saying that.
It's unfortunate. Old people, they're the ones.
I want a politician brave enough to say that old people are going to die. That's what I want. We should make the case that this is about your children and your grandchildren. I hope people care about that. Sometimes I don't think they do, though.
The problem with global warming as well is it's such an abstract concept, to think about like a global ecosystem. It's not like the sun, the Earth going around the sun, right? We can imagine the Earth, we can imagine the sun, we see it in the sky. But with global warming, it's tough for them to grasp.
That was a tough sell once. That was a tough sell once upon a time.
It was a tough
sell. And it seems like a better sell is the erratic weather patterns we're seeing.
I mean, again, I think this comes back to education. Like, we have the data to prove like that we're all in some serious trouble, but people don't refer to the data. Like, we're talking about this, like, how do we win this debate? There's only a debate in the public and for the elites. There's not a debate for actual scientists. And
but the scientists aren't the ones making the policy.
No,
the
that's
scientists
true.
aren't the ones making the policy. And in fact, there's a huge strain of anti-intellectualism and anti-science in the mainstream right now. And if you can present all the data you want, and people are going to say, that's not really.
What you talk about, college boy?
Well, I've heard people say, well, and I've heard really well-educated people that I've never had a disagreement on say, well, they're not looking at a big enough swath of data. I mean, of course, we get cold and we get warm. It goes back and forth, and I'm
well. All that matters is what peer-reviewed scientific papers say. That is it.
But that's not all that matters in our
public. It doesn't matter.
It is all that matters. I mean, look.
Theoretically, yes. That is all that matters. But in reality, that's a very small voice. Sadly, it should be the largest voice. And in fact, And in fact, I think scholars and scientists should be a lot more actively engaged in our political policy. But sadly, that is not the case, because often what they say is unbiased towards financial interests or political interests, and that's a hard sell in politics. In politics,
Well, again, this
it's
is
sort of
further
expected.
evidence in my mind that we should seize the means of production.
Mike, tell me if you agree. I've always heard that it's the blood of the workers that lubricate the gears of capitalism.
Jesus. On that note, that's actually a perfect way to transition into Mike's section: labor, trade, and economy.
Here we go, Mike. I
So-
set you up.
There we go. What a
You're
nice
welcome.
Michael Bufano, everybody.
There's several things that I'm interested in, one of which is the growing monopolization of industries throughout the United States over the last 40 years, the consolidation in the banking sector, in oil, in telecommunications, in entertainment, and how this has affected competition and politics. Furthermore, I'm also interested in the effects of globalization and how this has affected labor throughout the globe. In particular with the United States, how a lot of manufacturing jobs have been sent overseas to countries like Mexico, China, where the labor is cheaper. So a lot of what I'll be discussing, both within the newsletter and my own articles, is the effects of free trade as well. And lastly, energy and the consequences of being overly dependent on oil. And I'll be having an article come out on that issue in about a week, and about the fact that oil companies are so large that they're too big to fail, and that this is making reform very difficult for the future. And just as a question to kind of ask you guys, do you feel that the banking industry and the oil industry, that these companies have become so large, their influence in the political system has become so extensive, that it makes reform in the future difficult, if not impossible?
I don't think it's impossible, but it's like what worries me is that the reforms necessary. That's already a big if, and then beyond that, the transition is going to take a long time, and I'm wondering, do we have the time to spare? That is for me. That's how I feel about climate change. When I talk about our dependence on
You're wondering
oil.
if we're already you're wondering if we're already screwed.
Yeah, that's the kind of thinking I try to stray away from, is because I think it's pessimism, and you don't.
Well, that's
you
a
don't-
non-start. That's a
yeah,
non-starter.
you don't
though.
solve any problems by well, we're all dead. As our political system, as our economic models, are these the things, these big, seemingly at times immutable institutions, are those what's really blocking transition to really a future in general? I mean,
It is really quite extensive, and I think most people don't understand how much it really extends across both parties. I just did this article on oil. I'm doing another one on banking, which will be ready in a couple weeks.
Sure.
And you look at the money that's given out. It's given to both sides. These companies, they give to both sides of the aisle. They get enough votes, 60% in the Senate, over 50% in the House of Representatives, to be able to influence the system, to be able to get the tax breaks they need, to get the subsidies they need, to get the type of deregulation they need to continue to earn more money, to be able to merge with other companies and get larger. So it's going to be a big challenge in the future, how to break apart these companies, how to create more competition within these markets, and to allow space for new innovative companies to kind of make their way in there.
in my mind, I think of it more like a question, like a problem. How do we solve it? And yeah, at times a lot of these things, particularly climate change, and the obstacles toward solving that problem, it seems like very grim. But in my mind, that's just further need to orient ourselves toward the problem. Just another question, because I think it's important to address labor specifically. In my mind, one thing that's really kind of weighs on me is the future of organized labor. And we're seeing displacements in areas like the sharing economy, or the gig economy, where people kind of have fits and starts of jobs. And automation is only going to kind of propel these kinds of disruptions. So what is the future of organized labor? Because formerly we used to have a system where basically you had labor and you had people with capital, and they would have an agreement with each other toward the laborers would work and they would get reimbursed by people with capital. But I don't know that that's a sustainable model for organized labor. Like, what does it mean to have a walkout or when your jobs are being automated? Thanks for playing. That, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, what is
tough.
in your mind? What is the future of organized labor? I'll let you respond to that, Mike.
There's going to be problems with organized labor because you look at what the key to organized labor is what we call horizontal collective action. That's where individuals who are at are at the same level economically, they live in the same areas, work at the same place, they're able to combine together to work as a single unit in order to fight for better wages, better working standards. The problem with the new labor market and this new service sector that's emerging is that there's too much job diversity. People are moving around too quickly. The jobs are too diverse. And this is primarily why we haven't seen a similar service sector labor movement that we saw in manufacturing over a century ago. And you look at the situation now where you have interns that are practically slave labor. They're working for nothing. Some people, they work as interns for several years before they could get an opening job. So this is a big concern for the future. How are we going to get service sector labor to be able to organize together to fight for better wages and a better standard of living?
Is it a matter of restructuring organized labor as it is, or is organized labor perhaps not the best, or are perhaps traditional organized labor models? Yeah. Are they not the best form? Should they be restructured, or should they be the
strike has to be thrown out. We have to start thinking about using the internet and as a means to getting people who live far distance away to work together. They're going to have to work together like an interest group where they lobby the government. They're going to have to form NGOs. They're not going to be able to work like traditional labor where they go outside the factory, picket, strike. It's just not going to work like that anymore in the future. They're going to have to find.
So how? Like, I think in my mind I already have like what I view as a potential solution here. But on that note, before I move to I don't know that there is that same model for labor. I don't know, because if they don't have the ability to strike, then
there has to be some sort of confrontational, and not confrontational in the violent sense, but there has to be some way that they can confront the people who actually have the capital and control.
And if you
things.
think about it, organized labor is one of the oldest. It's not one of the oldest institutions, but it's a very old institution in the United States. And a lot of the things that we enjoy today are because of organized labor. I enjoy my weekend. I enjoy my paid sick leave, my paid vacation days. Those aren't something that we just had. Those are something that people struck for. Those are something they fought for.
But I mean, you can say thank you.
And we can lose it.
You can say thank you for those advances and still recognize the issues in organized labor. I mean, there are issues because back when labor unions were first beginning to organize, it was the job, not the job market, but the workplace was much more akin to slave labor than today. I mean if you were a blue-collar worker, what we today call a blue-collar worker, which most people in industrial jobs back then were, you could be called upon to do anything, and for such minuscule wages, and you had no recourse. You could lose your job. You could suffer actual physical abuse from your employer. Henry Ford notoriously had the first labor union at Ford Motors roughed up in view of the news media, the print media at the time, and they were fighting against very real things. The environment isn't really the same as it was back then, and I think a lot of people have said that the labor unions have made incredible progress. Now companies are held more strictly to there's laws of standards of how employees have to be treated. And so a lot of people think that labor unions are still fighting the same fight they've been fighting for 100 years. They've sort of become outmoded, and they're sort of fighting. What's the phrase? What kind of ghosts? They're swinging at. There's some annoyingly archaic ghosts.
I don't know. Yeah, well, you're looking for other words for ghost. Apparition? I don't know.
No. There was an annoyingly archaic phrase I was looking for.
Let me propose. I mean, I think what we need, and I don't know if I agree with everything that's been said, but I think we need a new paradigm for labor capital relations, and I think part of it is because it doesn't work anymore. That's why I'm perhaps too much. I'm all about worker owned and operated businesses, but I've even had problems conceptualizing that myself.
Anyway, the way the German model works is that you have the workers will own a stake in the company. And what this does is when the CEO is making a decision, he's not just liable to the stockholders. He's not just liable to the people making a profit off the company, but to the workers themselves and their long-term future. So there's a better balance there. And there might not be as much innovation in the Central Asian economy as you find in Great Britain and the United States, but there is more stability, and there is a more gap in wealth between the rich and poor. The German workers have a far greater, they own a percentage of the company. You don't always see this type of stock sharing. Some companies, certainly in the United States, do engage in where the workers can, invest in some of the stock of the company, or they'll give the workers some stock options.
Largely tech and telecom companies.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it does show to create incentive for the workers to care more about the company, to care more about their job.
For instance, if you make $50,000 a year. You make $50,000 a year if the company does good, if the company does okay, if the company does bad. You might get fired if they do really bad, or laid off rather. But that's not the same thing as having a share of the profits. And I think that's really what I'm getting at when I talk about worker cooperatives, because sometimes cooperatives are very localized. Like I only recently learned that in rural America there are energy cooperatives. Because this is news to me because I'm stupid. But in rural America, it's cooperatively owned, worker owned, and they provide energy for their communities, and it's integrated to the grid, but they supply power for hundreds of thousands of Americans. And in my mind, that's a more sustainable model. You're not going to choose to ship your job overseas, and if you choose to automate your job, you're probably doing so as an owner. You're still going to get the profit out of it. So the decision-making process, in that sense, would be slowed down. That might be one way of thinking about this problem of technology. That if workers have a say in what's in more of the technological disruption and how it's managed, it would slow it down, and it would also keep pace with society. I would think. Maybe I'm wrong.
Right. Well, but that would actually, in my mind, that's a more capitalistic model, because your input would be directly, it would be more directly related to the output, like the quality of your product and the way your business does would actually be reflected in your pay, rather than there just be a straight bottom line.
Yeah, that's actually a really common leftist critique of worker-owned cooperatives, is that they still choose to operate within a capitalist environment. I think that's a silly critique. Because I joke about workers being the means of production, but if workers,
you can't take away the need for motive for workers to work, right? I mean, if you put, this is the mistake that Mao Zedong made in China with his communes, where he forced people into these agricultural communes. There was zero incentive. It didn't matter how hard you worked; you were still getting the same amount of food. If you have a commune where everybody will benefit more if they produce more, it does create more incentive to work harder. So I think you do need to have, whatever system you have, there needs to be at least some incentive for workers to put in more effort. But of course, at the same time, we also have to think about the collective community as a whole. So those needs to be balanced together. But incentives do matter. So we always have to think about those when we're thinking about better economic models.
I know a lot of people on the left, the problem that they have with the incentive model is that they have a problem with a capital incentive.
Yes.
They believe that and it's an argument that I certainly understand, but it seems like anything you would substitute for an incentive would take the place pretty
I'm
squarely.
Happy to articulate that a little bit better, or a little bit more in terms of the no, I don't mean. That sounded bad. I mean, I want to articulate the argument that you're
I'm reveling in
critique,
it
because I identify with that, because the current incentive to work in our society, the American economy, is that if you don't have a job, you're going to starve. You're not going to starve, but you're not going to be afford groceries like most people would. You're not going to be able to afford rent.
Right.
Your quality of life.
You'll be dependent on food stamps and welfare, which is only going to provide you with a very minimal level of...
In my mind, that's kind of coercive in my mind, and I actually do identify with that argument. In that's the incentive structure we have now. You either work or you don't eat. You either work or you don't get to play the new Xbox game. It's and that bothers me because I love Xbox games.
But that means that you want to be able to do nothing and have the benefits of.
That's exactly.
But I don't want to do nothing. I really don't believe that most people. I believe that most people don't want to do nothing.
That's the argument. There's a psychological argument that needs to be made here. Is that whenever people talk about if you remove incentive, then people won't work. I don't know if that's true, because when we're talking about automation and people being put out of work, and how will they find meaning if they don't have work?
Yes.
Obviously, work is for most people, for good or for ill. I certainly question it. Is how they form identity and how they form meaning in life. I mean,
whatever your job is, you do it for 8 hours a day. I mean, that's a huge chunk of your life.
So you almost have to make yourself identify with it in a way. I don't see that as, you often hear that people on welfare are just lazy. They just sit around all day and don't do anything. But I don't know that people are able to maintain proper self-esteem and proper self-respect doing that. So that I certainly don't see people sitting around not working in a for example, in a system where it wasn't coercive, as Adam said, in the same way as our system. I don't see people sitting around and just thinking, boy, this is the good life.
Well, I'm mixed on this type of issue. I mean, obviously I just gave the Chinese example, and, you had over 10 million who starved to death because the system created no incentives for farmers to farm. And so you had huge shortages that took place, and millions of people dying. Yeah. So I do believe there needs to be some incentives. However, I think it's the job of the government to try to incentivize people to want to go out and do what they love. And this is where education comes in, right? You have these 12 years in a young person's life where they could find something that they love to do, something that they could at least do for 8 hours a day, where they're not going to come home and shoot themselves in the head out of depression, right?
No.
And also educate them, so with music and art and literature, and so that they could find something that's not just all about work, right? That it's sports, academia.
Well, what do we do about? Because I know I have a lot of conservative friends that when you bring up, for example, making college affordable to everybody. The argument they always say is that, you're just going to have a bunch of people majoring in the humanities, and that's obviously worthress to society.
No, humanities earn more than the sciences. I mean, that's just a total misperception. If you go into
how do you make the argument that somebody should major in, say, an identity study, like African American studies, women's studies, or something like sociology?
Oh, you go into social services. Absolutely, you go into education, teach.
But I know a lot of people that would say, no, open a business, small business. I mean, is that just seems like a hacky conservative thing to say, that no, business is where it's at. We don't need social service. People just need to work. I mean, that's just there's no argument that needs to be made, I suppose.
For example, you go into any urban community, you need people who work in for child abuse. You have centers that deal with children that are being abused. You have people who work in welfare services, and you need those type of people, and it's
just as a final critique, and I'll let you respond. I just see a really big gap between a philosophy we agree on, do what you love, and a reality, in my perception, maybe we don't agree, which is sell your labor. Not everyone. Yeah. People don't love working at McDonald's. No one loves working at McDonald's. We should automate the hell out of that job. But not because I want them to starve.
So that no one has to do it.
Yeah, how I felt about being a server. Like being a server and a bartender. When I heard about a completely automated restaurant, I was like, that's fantastic. I never ever want to do. I hated being a server. So
but then I mean, it would have been doing your job. Like I think that there's a difference between work and toil. That's an important distinction to be made. I think our current system creates a lot of necessity for toil.
All right, I want Mike to respond to that before we move on to global conflict and development.
Yeah, you said that.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, it's obviously we don't want people working 70 hours a week just to struggle, just to get by. We would hope that with technological advances that people would be able to work a 35, 40-hour a week maximum in order to provide for their family and have plenty of vacation time and weekends to be able to do things that they love, spending time with family, playing an instrument, playing a sport. I have no problem with work, but it needs to be balanced with personal life. And I think in America we are so skewed towards work that we've created this psychological problem where we're not spending enough time with family, and I think that's why so many are addicted to Xanax and a lot of these other pills that take away people's depression because we're working too much. I think we're one of the few countries in the developed world that doesn't have mandatory vacation time for workers.
In general, in the United States, certainly, and around the world, we're seeing a pretty vast divorce from productivity, which is up, and only going further as we increase automation and we use technology to enable productivity. But at the same time, earned wages, are stagnating. They're pretty much staying the same. So
that's what I was going to say.
Most people are completely divorced from the increase in productivity, the increase in profit, and I guess that's why I'm so much interested in worker-owned options, is because to me that marries them together again. Casey, I'll let you jump in before we move on.
Well, my last thing to say about this is in terms of automation, it's more of a sociological problem or a socio-psychological. If automation were to come in and remove all the food service jobs, all the jobs where people aren't all the non-dream jobs that people don't think about being when they're kids. Yeah. But that's going to create a large. That's going to put a lot of people are going to be out of work, but that's not just a labor problem. That's going to cause a huge social problem. Yeah, exactly. So there's going to have to be a lot of structures that are organized before this change and are going to sort of have to overnight. I don't know how you organize a long-term shift, organizing all these different structures along the same path. That's the only worry I have, is that it's like driving a gigantic ship. You have to. I don't know. It seems like it can be a little unwieldy, and just the mechanics of it. I don't know how that would work going forward, but I believe it needs to happen.
Yeah,
human beings have historical problems with central governments attempting to direct the entire economy. With Soviet Russia under Stalin, for example, where you tried to have central planning, it's a struggle to do it because there are so many moving parts, and it's not something that it's easy for human beings to plan in that nature. And so it's definitely going to be a challenge in the future. How do we deal with? We need collective action. But at the same time, it's incredibly difficult for a central entity to direct an entire economy like that.
Yeah, and again, a perfect transition sentence for our next section, global conflict and development, because one of my main issues is the role of authoritarian regimes in the world. I'm going to be a bit controversial here, but I think democracy is good.
Hey,
I don't think that's not controversial at all, man.
No, that's right. I
feel like maybe I'm imposing my values on people. But,
Mike was super literal.
Yeah, but no. So in my mind, my background is in the Middle East, and in the conflict and global conflict and development section, we're going to be looking at conflicts and sustainable peace. So what I mean by that is, my background in the Middle East, I do focus a lot on the Syrian civil war, the war in Yemen right now, but there are also issues about, the conflict in Ukraine, Boko Haram in Central Africa. There are also peace agreements that we're really interested in, such as Colombia, which is on the verge of ending a civil war that's gone on for over 50 years, y'all. And then you have you have quieter conflicts which spring up from time to time, like the Kurdish issue in Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria, and you also have Israel Palestine, which I think is on the verge of another.
Never heard of it.
Never heard of it. On the verge of another explosion. Certainly, it has these cycles of heating up and cooling off, but it never really goes away because there's no solution. I think there is a solution, but there's no political leadership to seize that solution. And then I'm also interested in this section in multilateral structures like the UN, but not just the UN, also the EU, that kind of binds states together and gives them a forum to communally solve problems. And I think that's a big issue for climate change, and it could be a big issue for dealing with economic disruptions that caused by technology and even social disruptions, perhaps. Another key issue for me in this, as an American, sorry everybody, I apologize for being an American, but the role of the United States in the world is a really big issue in my mind. Because right now there seems to be, and I think this is going to be the discussion question. You know what? I'll come back to that in a second. There's a lot of challenges for the development in the 21st century because of economic and social development, while dealing with the technological changes that the developed world is going to have to deal with. Imagine what disruptive technologies, and Mike described some earlier in the question about Uber and taxis in Egypt. How does a developing economy adjust to these disruptions? Especially when they're managed by paternalistic, clientelistic dictators who are just scum.
Coup d'etats and revolutions is what happens. You take a look at Egypt, and as its population grows, this was, if you went back to the early 1980s, Egypt's economy, as well as many others throughout the Middle East, were very much dependent on the oil markets and sending workers to the Gulf. They would go work there, send money back home. But as Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, as their populations have grown, this has become unsustainable. And so now the governments are stuck where they need to diversify the economy. They need to actually educate their populations, but they've struggled to do so because of corruption and clientelism in their political systems.
Absolutely.
They've not been able to adapt. And so this has led to political conflict, revolutions, and coups d'etats in the last couple of years.
In India, you always hear about how India is a major world economic power now, and that's true. But the noticeable thing is that as wealth in India rises, the condition of those in the lower socioeconomic levels is not increasing. All this money is funneling in to the predictable areas, to the predictable people. There is mild growth within like the middle class, which didn't used to exist in India. But you don't see a lot. There's not a lot of benefit to the poorer people of this economic growth, and that's because there's such a huge disconnect, and it has to do with things like infrastructure and things like farm to market road availability and things like that. But you're not seeing revolutions in India though, and I was wondering if
there's a lot of class conflict, right?
There's a lot of misplaced frustration, I think, because of the economic situation, but it usually goes to intercommunal conflict between Hindus and Muslims in areas like Gujarat, which Narendra Modi was formerly governor of, especially notably during the Gujarat riots, in which pogroms were carried out against the Muslim communities.
Dropping that bomb.
But you're not seeing.
We here at Future Left are not fans of Modi.
But you're not seeing a lot of. But you don't see a lot of there's, and I almost don't know what an Indian Spring sort of uprising would look like because
right. Well,
because the lower socioeconomic levels are so vast. Like the majority of Indians live near or under the poverty line, and to this day, and I don't know how they would organize. I don't know what it would look like.
Casey, do you ever foresee India breaking up into pieces based on geographic location and the different ethnicities in different parts of the country?
So India, popularly in their popular culture, is very very patriotic. I'd even say patriotism is more visible in India than it is in the United States, even within their films. You never forget that it's India. They're constantly talking about it. And there's this constant reinforcement of, despite what language you speak, because India has, at last count, somewhere in the mid to high 30s of officially recognized languages. That's not even counting dialects. and in fact, most Indian states are divided along linguistic lines, and those identities run so deep, despite talks of Indian unity. But usually, if they divide, they usually it doesn't break up India. Usually, you have states dividing. India is considered a very sacred thing. Uh, and I almost wonder if it has to do with, a lot of Hindus believe that India itself is sacred and is a goddess. And so I think there's a lot of willingness to fracture over political ideals. You have Maoist groups in the South, which have broken off into their own little microstates. And you're having new, the state of Andhra Pradesh recently broke off another state called Telangana, where they speak Telugu, and that's I believe, and so that's not anathema, but it's all kept within India. So no, I don't see India breaking up, and perhaps that has to do with the recent memory of partition and the creation of the breaking up of India by the British, which is still, India still has a very romantic sort of love-hate relationship with Pakistan. They still view that as they used to be us, we are them, but we constantly have this thing going on, and so I don't know. It's a complicated thing. There's a lot of cultural things that I think are preventing that from happening. So no, in the near future, I don't see that happening. Boy, that was long-winded.
No.
It's fascinating.
Exactly, yeah. Well, like I said, my background's in the Middle East, so I love hearing about other places in the world that are having problems.
Schadenfreude.
No, so I guess the thing I wanted, the discussion question for this section I had in mind is why should we care? And obviously I know I care because I'm special. I'm a very good person. I care. But yeah, thank you. But the main thing, like I get, there's a sense, and particularly with the Middle East. Again, sorry, I'm biased. It's all about the Middle East for me. There's between the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, I get a sense that the world, not like the Middle East especially, but also the world in general, it seems to be a growing current. This is more true for other regions than others, like the Middle East. How do we convince Americans that America's role in the world is important and that it should not withdraw?
I see it most in libertarianism, where you have two kind of libertarians. You have libertarians that say that we should stay out of the affairs of other parts of the world because they should remain sovereign and we should respect them. But then there's a large number of libertarians that seem to think we should stay out of other countries and not help them because fuck them, they're other countries. And there's a large strain of isolationism that I see in the United States, and you see it in people that want to live in compounds in the woods with all their guns and prepare for the coming race wars. I mean that is a growing thing, but I'll let Mike take over.
I'll give a very simple and plain reason. The computers we're talking on right now, they contain new metals that most of which can only be found in Western China. The rubber in your tires on your car comes from a rubber plant. These don't grow in temperate climates. They grow in places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo or Indonesia. The different products, like, for example, your coffee. This comes from tropical regions of the world. Many of the things that we use on a daily basis and we take for granted, they cannot be produced in the United States. They have to be produced in different parts of the world, whether it's because of climate or because of the mineral resources that are located in that part of the world. We have to depend on others. Not to mention our technology today, airplanes, nuclear weapons. We're too interconnected. There's no way we can. This is not like the 1920s where we could just slip back and lose ourselves and fold into ourselves and not care about the rest of the world. It's not like that anymore. We are too interconnected with everything to ever become isolationist again.
Despite those very real things that you just mentioned, that I also believe, those are beliefs at the end of the day. And there are large numbers of people that believe that all of those industries that you mentioned we should either do without, or we should bring them back home, because we should only be concerned about what happens within our borders, and that we were better off doing so. I disagree, but how do you counter that argument?
There are things that we just can't produce here. I mean, a lot of our medicine, rubber for your tires for your car. I mean, you can't produce that in the United States. We can't just be dependent on ourselves. And I know a lot of people want to view America as being this great entity, and the rest of the world needs us, not the way around. But it's simply not true. It's flat out not true. There's a reason why Europeans engaged in imperialism in the late 19th century.
You described it as a belief, Casey. Maybe it's silly to say, well, the difference is we're right and they're wrong. But honestly, it's not a belief; it's a fact. We are interrelated. The jobs that Mike talked about, like rare metals and coffee. I mean,
No, I know, but
we're not bringing those jobs back home.
No, I know, but I meant the argument that we need to be interrelated. I know that we are, but the argument about its necessity. I'm sure that there's arguments to the contrary, that it's a necessity. I'm sure that there's people out there that would think that's fatalistic. The isolationists, the America firsters, the American exceptionalists.
Again, the thing is they're wrong. And on that note, it's about like we can talk about security. And Mike, I'll let you start the conversation about security and how that.
Yeah, go back to where we were talking about security.
Oh. Okay, well, because we're dependent on those markets, anytime there's a conflict somewhere else across the globe, the price of that product will rise. So if a conflict breaks out in Colombia, the price of your coffee is going to go up, right? If there's a conflict in Iraq, the price of oil is going to shoot up. Because we're so interconnected, anytime there is a conflict across the globe, it affects our wallets. Not to mention, when there are conflicts, it can come back home to bite us. In the case of, when you think 9/11, when you think terrorism, if there's instability in one part of the globe, it can affect us very directly. So we're so interconnected, it doesn't just affect economics, it affects politics. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that the United States should go and play global police and invade whatever country they want and not cooperate with the United Nations like George Bush did in 2003 with Iraq. But it does mean that the United States can't pull back. It has to play a role as a world leader in trying to end conflicts in a peaceful manner. So we can't retreat.
I'm actually, and this is, again, on the left, this is not something I'm supposed to say, but I'm pretty conflicted about it, actually, because of my disdain for dictators and corrupt bastards around the world. I mean, because there's an argument on the right that, the Middle East was better with Gaddafi and Saddam. But on the left, it's also been articulated by Bernie Sanders to a lesser extent. Though I like a lot of his social policies and his economic policies, he doesn't have much of a foreign policy, and it is his belief that Libya, which is actually gluing itself back together without a scumbag in charge of the country. There might be another scumbag soon. It's very much possible, but Libya has a chance today that it didn't have under Gaddafi. It was a limited campaign. The objective of the campaign was to stop a massacre in Benghazi, and we did that. So in that sense, the mission was a success. For the country, it was very difficult because we pretty much just left after that, especially after the death of Ambassador Stevens in 2012. It's an issue for both the right and the left. So what, I guess, is the appropriate posture? I also disagree with going around the world and knocking around dictators and calamity ensues and then we just walk away.
That's because we've traditionally done that to support our own interests with a complete disregard for the interests of the population. But I sort of agree that given our power and our influence and our resources, that it's almost immoral to stand by and watch atrocities like that happen while we do nothing.
Which we're doing now, as Syria implodes with hundreds of thousands of people being slaughtered. Which we are doing that right now. It's not just an issue of we dropped the ball on Rwanda. No, we're dropping the ball right now.
Well, so Syria is an incredibly difficult issue, right? Because you have Russia that is propping up the Assad regime, and Russia doesn't want to build through Syria because this would Europe could become more dependent on the Gulf oil instead of Russian oil, and we don't want to risk a direct conflict with Russia. So I think that's part of why we've shown a lot more caution with Syria than we did with Libya. Gaddafi was like the smelly kid at the lunch table. He had no friends in the international community.
No.
You
I
know,
mean,
so
actually,
it was,
Gaddafi was able to reinvigorate relations with the West. Even though he was a state sponsor of terror for a long, long time, he had started selling oil to Europe again, and he had
in the last couple of years before his collapse. But you know,
because he saw it coming, though. He saw it coming.
But he didn't have strong ties like a state like Israel does, or a state like Syria does to Russia, or with Israel with the United States. You know, these permanent allies that are going to back them up no matter how atrocious their policies are, with North Korea and China, right? Libya, you know, we responded immediately, and the Security Council did not stop us. China and Russia abstained. The United States, Great Britain, and France decided to go ahead with the operation. In the case of Syria, Russia will not stop at anything to prevent Assad from falling from power. So they're fully intent on making sure he stays in control of at least part of that country.
The thing is, with American disengagement on the Syrian crisis, I think part of it has little to do with us being afraid of Russia or wanting to manage our relationship with Russia. I think most of it has to do with Obama's personal preference that, like, look, the Middle East is a mess. And the argument that has been made by administration officials and critiqued by ex-officials actually is that, you know, we intervened and we invaded and occupied in Iraq, and it turned to hell. We intervened in Libya but did not occupy, it turned to hell. We did not intervene and we did not occupy in Syria, and it turned to hell. That's and that is the perspective of the Obama administration, and that is by and large the case of why we should not get involved in such conflicts. But in my mind, as the Syrian crisis and the refugee crisis spreading to Europe, we can see now that, again, Mike, you're correct. We are interconnected. Like what happens in Syria don't stay in Syria. The answer to this is multilateral efforts, and not like we did in Libya, where it was, you know, we defend Benghazi and Gaddafi goes down and gets stabbed in the butt until he's dead. We have to have long-term strategies for these things, these crises. Look, that's not a joke. That's what happened. It's stabbed in the butt until he died.
No, but that's
how did he not see? How did he not see it coming? He was Gaddafi'd. How could he had to have seen that coming?
Yeah.
You're right.
Lou Gehrig.
There needs to be a mix of military aid mixed with economic and social development. Long after these conflicts end,
that's where we've always dropped the ball, though. That's where we dropped the ball there in Afghanistan.
We dropped it with Afghanistan right after the civil war with Russia,
right.
In the 1980s. We left that country.
Dropped the ball with Iraq.
That's the biggest problem for me. Is like even multilateral efforts. I don't know that we actually learn from our mistakes. That's the problem. I think that's the big issue, though, is we have to do this as a group. We have to use local support. We have to, it has to be, if we have some sort of authority over, like, for instance, Afghanistan, we have to be much more tied in with the local population. That was the big failure in Iraq, is we went in, we disbanded the military, and everyone with a gun, you're fired. That is a great strategy. Yeah, it's a complicated question. Our role in the world. It's one we're going to be investigating at Future Left. But we will put that issue. We're going to put it in the parking lot. We'll circle around back to it later. We're going to move on to American Communities, which is a section curated by Casey Rogers himself.
Basically, looking at America from the standpoint of it being its level of cultural diversity, looking at its education, looking at governance in terms of social policies and domestic policies, and wealth inequality, just the issues that are preventing, are obstacles for us to moving ahead to being the sort of society that we would hope to be in the future. So I look at things like the experience of LGBT communities. For example, what I'm always asking is, what does a 21st century American society look like? And there's a reality, and then there's the ideal. There's where are we going? And a lot of this has to do, like everything we've talked about before, it all seems to come back to education. Education seems to have a hand in everything going forward,
especially in the solutions.
Well, yeah. I mean, and I would say it's a final solution. if you look at the future of America, we're becoming increasingly divided along racial lines, political lines, class lines, as I mentioned before, with wealth distribution, social identities, like the controversy that's going on right now, oddly enough, with bathrooms and people who are transgender. Guns, guns is an issue. Not gun policy, just guns. I talk a lot about guns, like Hunter S. Thompson. But it's sadly it's one of those things that's dividing us politically. Science divides us politically. So many things in America divide us politically that shouldn't. But that's part of having the level of comfort that we have in this country.
Sure.
Well, in the last 40 years, there's been growing partisanship with people. They're identifying more and more with their political party.
Absolutely.
We see there's less and less compromise within the halls of Congress and within society in general over these issues. And we put ourselves into these different boxes, and we're so scared to, if we're on the left, we're so scared to take on just one position that on the right or vice versa, and I don't feel that that's right. I really feel that with every single issue that we should analyze the facts as much as possible and try to come up with the best solution, not based on the party rhetoric, but based on
spontaneously, and using our judgment rather than a programmatic way of thinking. But doesn't a lot of this have to do? And I know me and Adam have talked about this a lot, and I think we've talked about it, Mike, but the information explosion that we've seen over the last few years, of course, there's major benefits. I know that's Adam's the tech guy. Adam, how would you frame that in terms of the way that this information explosion has influenced us?
I can't recall if I said it during the disruptive technology section, but if you think about it like this. Like the smartphone that I have in my pocket, or it's actually on my desk right now. I don't want to lie to anyone. I'm an honest guy. But the smartphone that most people possess today has the computing power of all of NASA did when it put a man on the moon. And we make jokes like, we make jokes like, we use it to look at cat pictures, but we use it for a lot of things. It's not. I mean,
yes,
like
absolutely.
Not just for cat.
Exactly, and if you think about since the birth of computers, computing power has in the past 60 years, computing power has increased 1 trillion-fold. That's difficult to I can't even conceptualize it, honestly.
That's a number. That's a number I don't get to use very often.
Yeah, exactly. And when in terms of the amount of data that's transferred and information that's going everywhere. We're approaching what's called, I think, a zettabyte. A zettabyte comprises what most of us deal with, gigabytes, maybe terabytes, some of us. A zettabyte is just an insane amount of information, and we're approaching a level of data distribution that's equivalent to basically thousands and thousands of hours of high-definition video every year. And that's a lot of information moving around. We use it in a lot of different ways, and I think it affects us in terms of our society, especially within the political realm. And I think this is honestly what I'd like to talk about. Our little discussion piece for this section is the role of information and really the media's role therein in American societies. I mean, most people get on Facebook, they see a headline of a story maybe, or they see one of these goddamn images with text on it. They read the text that they agree with. They hit share. They think nothing about the veracity of the information they're getting, or they just see the headline. They click share. They don't read the article. Maybe they read the first paragraph. And
I'm sure all of us have seen people share Onion articles thinking that they're winning the conversation.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is the danger of the internet. If you went back to the 1960s, there was a vanguard for the media. If you read a book, if you read something, you watched something, there was a professional outlet, whether it's a professional editor or a professional journalist that filtered that information. Also, sure, there's bias, but at the same time, there was a professional that went through it. with the internet now, any schmuck can go online.
And they are schmucks.
And a lot of them are schmucks.
And schmoes. And schmoes.
And schmoes. And they could.
I love Yiddish.
Post anything, and it's incredible what's out there. Alien conspiracy theories with the building of the pyramids. A lot of these 9/11 conspiracy theories. It just proliferates on the internet, and it's tough.
And then the one thing that I think makes us different from the America of the past, like the '60s, besides it obviously being the greatest time in American history, you've seen Leave It to Beaver, is the people had and this might sound elitist, but people had shame about talking about things they didn't know what they were talking about. Nowadays, because there's such an availability of information, and that information here doesn't just mean facts. It means information, good or bad. People have such a confidence, an overconfidence in what they know, and there's this huge influx of certainty. And people who know very little, like the most ignorant people, seem the most stubborn and wanting to say, no, this is a fact. This is a fact. You don't hear anyone say, I don't know anymore. No one wants to concede anything. And I think that has to do with the availability of information, and that combined with our education system's lack of it hasn't kept up in terms of teaching critical thinking. So you've got this struggle between critical thinking versus the internet, which is basically how I think of it.
Right. I mean and like the basic thing in terms of like education, like I feel like I'm a product of the Texas public education system, so like maybe this isn't true of other people, but I don't think I was exposed to really like read this and then you go back into the classroom and you're supposed to know everything that's in it. You're not supposed to question what's in it, which is the main thing I got out of community college, and my graduate experience. In my mind, that's the tool that I think that is most useful. I read something and then I consider the veracity of the source. Most people,
I cross-check. I know how to research. Yes, I know how to check sources. I don't
think we can get by anymore with relegating that to college level thing. That has to be something we do in primary education.
With my high school students, immediately when they get into 10th grade, they learn how to get good information on the internet. What is a good source? How to write a research paper? How to debate? We take the stuff. They don't just read the textbook. We find debate topics in there. I'll split the class in half or into 4 parts, and they'll have to defend different perspectives, and they'll have to learn how to defend an argument and how to do research on it. It's not easy to do it, and I think the difficult aspect of it right now is that, like, if you look at most history departments in the United States, they have this long list of standards where you have to teach every single part of history. Yep. But you spend so much time with just the content, there's not enough time for critical thinking, for debating. That's why it's nice that I'm at a private school, because I could structure my own curriculum and leave some time in there to do debates, research projects. I do this at the end of every year. The kids have an MUN conference. So this enables for better interaction with the material, and the funny thing is the kids actually remember more of the content because they're interacting with it more.
They're engaged.
They're thinking critically. They're engaged.
Yeah, they're forever one of the major selling points, if you will, I guess, of the Western, and that's in air quotes, educational system is that it wasn't just rote memorization of everything. And sadly, I feel like the way that American public schools have gone within the last few years are in vying for funding for schools. Like Mike said, you have these standards, and it's certainly more intense within the math and science curriculums, but you even have it within the history curriculum, that you have these specific things that these kids have to know, so it reflects on your career. Like your career can be in jeopardy if they don't know these things. And there's so much content. There's so much content that you're pretty much asking these kids just to memorize facts for the exams. and there's no attempt to engage with it from a different. I mean, you can, but time is so sparse that you really don't have time. I had a teacher when I was in high school who every day when we would go in, she would write notes on an overhead and we would copy them down for the whole class. And that's what we did. And I never knew what was going on. I was always lost. I always just ended up studying my notes toward the end, and I feel like a lot of teachers have lost their passion for teaching because your hands are so tied, and it's like a cookie cutter. It's like a conveyor belt.
When we're talking about curriculum or education, we're often we're talking about teaching often national narratives that's related, at least in some sense, to impressing certain national narratives onto students. This need for a national narrative, which I don't think is something political powers are necessarily interested in having challenged. Doesn't this kind of national narrative historiography serve as an obstacle to critical thinking when the objective isn't exactly to challenge it?
In two ways.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Casey.
No, I was going to say it probably does. I usually don't get the feeling that's a top-down enforced where people are thinking we need to make sure there's more propaganda in our history. I feel like usually what it is trying to avoid public schools.
An awkward parent-teacher conference.
Exactly. Mike, I'm sure you would agree. I don't know. You teach at a public school or a private school in Egypt, but I know in American public schools there's so much emphasis on, especially in your teacher training, on controversy. You want to avoid controversy as much as possible because the administrators don't want parents complaining about you.
I get in trouble in South Carolina for teaching that slavery was the main cause of the Civil War.
Right.
I was doing my student teaching there. It was the first week. Well, it wasn't that most of the students were in full agreement with me, and
sure.
I showed them documents of secession from South Carolina. Well, one kid went home to his parents. His parents complained to the principal. I had to sit down with the principal and the parents, and I had to explain to them why we have enormous amounts of evidence that slavery was a major cause of the Civil War, that it was at the center of this conflict. But I think with these type of issues, the way textbooks have to deal with it, and this is a big problem with textbooks. Textbooks often, with history, just present concrete knowledge without presenting questions.
Should we give them a copy of South Carolina secession papers and then ask them, well, Jimmy, why do you think South Carolina?
Absolutely.
We should. We should, but in the current system, that's not possible because the teacher's time has to be devoted. The teacher's hands are so tied. Like we've said, that happens in AP course. Yes, short answer, yes. That is what we should be doing.
On that note, I think we'll close this out today. We had a very long session today, so I thank you for listening. For all of our shenanigans, be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter. Visit us at